In the dying days of the Third Reich, chaos ruled Europe. Cities were burning, armies were retreating, and an empire built on terror was collapsing into ruin. But somewhere in the mountains of Poland, a rumor began, a whisper of a train loaded with Nazi gold hidden deep within the earth as Hitler's world fell apart. It was said to carry tons of stolen treasure, gold bars, priceless art, jewelry stripped from the victims of the Holocaust, all sealed inside armored wagons and sent south under SS guard. Then it vanished, no record of its arrival. No wreckage, no trace. For decades, the legend haunted miners, treasure hunters, and historians alike. Tunnels sealed by explosives. Secret maps drawn in fading ink. Eyewitnesses who swore they saw the last train of the Reich disappear into the mountains near Walbers. Was it real or a phantom born of war's confusion? The truth behind the Nazi gold train lies buried beneath history itself, and perhaps still beneath the Polish soil in the final year of the Second World War. The Third Reich was collapsing under the weight of its own ambitions. The Allied advance from the west and the Soviet juggernaut from the east had reduced Hitler's empire to fragments. Cities that once symbolized Nazi power were burning, and the streets of Berlin echoed not with parades, but with fear. Yet, even as defeat became inevitable, one obsession remained constant among Nazi leaders: their gold. For years, the Reich had plundered Europe with ruthless precision. From the art galleries of Paris to the cathedrals of Krakow, entire cultural legacies vanished into the hands of German officers. Gold teeth from concentration camp victims, Jewish family heirlooms, crates of museum art, even church relics. Everything that glittered was seized and catalogued as Reich property. By 1945, this vast hoard was scattered across the continent, stored in castles, salt mines, and hidden vaults. But as the Red Army pushed west, panic spread among the Nazi elite. They knew what Soviet occupation meant. What they couldn't carry, they sought to hide. It was during these desperate final months that stories began to surface of a train, heavily guarded by SS troops, seen traveling through Lower Silesia. According to witnesses, it was no ordinary train. Its wagons were sealed, its schedule secret, and its purpose known only to the Reich's inner circle. The destination: somewhere in the Owl Mountains, near the city of Walbers, a region already crawling with Nazi engineers. This area was part of a secret construction, its project known as Ries, German for giant. Deep beneath the forested slopes, the Nazis had carved vast tunnels and underground chambers, possibly intended for weapons research, underground factories, or even a Final Four headquarters. Thousands of slave laborers from concentration camps died building it. It was the perfect place to hide something that was never meant to be found. By spring 1945, trains filled with stolen treasure were moving out of Wrocław, then Breslau, as Soviet artillery drew near. One of those trains, loaded with gold, diamonds, and priceless art, was reportedly sent to Wardwall Burza and then disappeared from all records. When Soviet troops reached the area, they found tunnels sealed with explosives, rail lines cut, and entrances buried. But the rumored train was gone, as if swallowed by the earth itself. Over the decades, locals spoke of strange discoveries: armored wagons glimpsed in half-collapsed tunnels, maps hidden by former Nazi officers, and radiation readings deep underground. Yet no excavation ever revealed solid proof. Still, the legend refused to die. To some, it was just a myth, a wartime tale born from chaos and greed. To others, it was a tantalizing clue to Hitler's hidden fortune buried beneath the mountains of Poland. As time passed, the gold train became more than a mystery. It became a symbol of everything that vanished in the last days of the Reich: its secrets, its crimes, and its desperate attempt to preserve power, even as the world around it crumbled. The story of the Nazi gold train is inseparable from the chaos of the Reich's final months. By early 1945, Hitler's empire was collapsing faster than his generals could react. Millions of civilians fled westward, terrified of the approaching Red Army. Train stations overflowed with refugees and soldiers alike, their faces gray with exhaustion. But among those endless trains of the desperate, a few carried cargo far more valuable than human life. Nazi officials, bankers, and SS officers began transferring treasure from Eastern territories back into Germany. Some shipments went to the Austrian Alps, where Hitler's inner circle believed they could regroup for a last stand. Others were hidden in salt mines and mountain bunkers, places like Altaussee, Merkers, and Hohenzollern. Each new discovery of looted art or gold after the war hinted at just how immense the Nazi plunder truly was. But the most persistent legend came from Silesia, the region now part of southwestern Poland. During the war, Silesia was heavily fortified, riddled with tunnels, mines, and secret railways. The Germans had transformed it into a labyrinth of underground construction. The Reis project alone consumed vast resources and thousands of lives, building tunnels large enough to hide entire trains. And within this region, witnesses began to speak. One Polish railway worker recalled seeing a heavily guarded train leaving Wrocław in the spring of 1945, escorted by SS soldiers who ordered all signals cleared along its route. Another story came from a local farmer who claimed he heard explosions echoing from the nearby hills days later, as if tunnels had been sealed. After that, no one saw the train again. When the Soviets captured Lower Silesia, immediately began searching for hidden German assets. NKVD officers combed mines, seized records, and interrogated anyone who might know where the Reich's treasure had gone. Soviet intelligence eventually claimed to have found large quantities of valuables, but what and where was never disclosed. Many believe whatever they uncovered was quietly shipped back to Moscow. For the locals who remained, strange rumors persisted for decades. Miners would tell stories of collapsed shafts with iron debris buried beneath them. Children exploring. The forests near Walberzet spoke of blocked tunnels and air vents hidden in the ground. A few explorers even claimed to have found German railway tracks leading directly into mountain walls, tracks that ended in solid stone. After the war, communist authorities discouraged any talk of hidden treasure. Excavations were forbidden. Maps were seized. But the legend lived on in whispers and in the memories of those who had seen too much to dismiss it entirely as the decades passed. The gold train became both myth and obsession. Amateur historians pored over wartime records, looking for missing trains and unexplained gaps in schedules. Polish soldiers who fought in the area swore that secret construction had continued long after the war ended, possibly by Soviet hands. Was the train truly buried, or had it been found long ago and quietly removed? Every theory seemed possible, and yet none could be proved. Then, in the 21st century, technology and human curiosity would bring the legend roaring back to life. A new generation of treasure hunters armed with ground-penetrating radar and wartime maps would reignite global fascination with the Nazi gold train and force historians to ask whether one of the last great mysteries of World War II still lies hidden beneath the Polish mountains. The legend of the Nazi gold train lives at the intersection of history and myth, where fact blurs with obsession, and truth is buried beneath layers of earth and secrecy. To understand the story's endurance, one must explore its three great angles: the historical, the human, and the psychological. The historical angle begins with the raw chaos of 1945. The German retreat was not an organized withdrawal, but a desperate, crumbling collapse. The Reich's infrastructure was in ruins, bridges destroyed, railways bombed, convoys strafed from the air. In this chaos, record-keeping broke down completely. Trains vanished, convoys never arrived. Units disappeared into the fog of retreat, never to be seen again. That made it the perfect environment for a legend to take root. The Nazis had spent years looting Europe, amassing fortunes that could fill entire vaults. In their final months, many of these treasures were relocated in panic, some to evade capture, others to preserve the wealth of high-ranking officers. SS men burned documents, destroyed archives, and swore their subordinates to secrecy. Even Hitler's personal orders were contradictory. One day, he demanded that nothing fall into enemy hands. The next, he told subordinates to safeguard German culture and assets for the future. In that confusion, anything was possible. Even a train loaded with gold disappearing into the mountains. By the time the Allies began uncovering the Nazi treasure network in 1945, they were stunned. In Merker's Germany, American troops found nearly 100 tons of gold bullion, crates of currency, and priceless paintings hidden in a salt mine in Altaussee. Austria, they discovered over 6,500 works of art, including Michelangelo's Madonna of Bruges and Vermeer's The Astronomer, stashed behind explosive-laden tunnels. In countless other mines and castles, Allied forces found everything from jewelry to religious relics. If such treasures could vanish in plain sight, why not one more train? That possibility gave the legend its strength. The gold train became the missing piece, the treasure that escaped even the Allies' vast post-war recovery operations. But beyond the historical reality lay something deeper, the human hunger for discovery. Poland, after the war, was a land built atop secrets. The scars of occupation, destruction, and Soviet domination ran deep. In regions like Lower Silesia, entire German towns had been emptied, their new Polish residents arriving in unfamiliar homes, often with sealed cellars and hidden basements. Stories of what the Nazis left behind, gold, weapons, or archives, became a kind of folklore. By the 1960s and 1970s, those whispers had matured into local legends. Miners claimed to have stumbled upon sealed tunnels near Kyzyog Castle. Hunters reported strange vibrations underground. And in local taverns, stories of the train became a ritual retelling, part cautionary tale, part promise of unimaginable fortune to many. It wasn't just treasure they were chasing. It was a piece of history buried by silence. The Polish government, cautious and tightly controlled under Soviet influence, discouraged any investigation. The Cold War added new layers of secrecy. Even the Soviets may have searched for the train themselves, but with no confirmed discovery. The mystery deepened, becoming part of Poland's national mythology. Then, decades later, came a new generation, armed with tools their predecessors lacked: ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and wartime aerial maps. In 2015, two men from Wałbrzych, Piotr Koper and Andreas Richter, announced that they had discovered the train's location using radar scans. Their claim ignited a frenzy unlike anything seen since the war. Media outlets around the world rushed to the story. The Polish government sent in the military to investigate the site. Investors arrived, hoping to stake a claim in whatever lay beneath. For a moment, it seemed the legend might finally yield its truth. But beneath the excitement, there lingered a haunting question. If the gold train was real, what exactly did it contain? Gold? Art? The looted wealth of millions? Or something? Far darker evidence of crimes the Nazis never wanted revealed. That uncertainty was what kept the world watching. The Nazi gold train had become more than a treasure. It was a mirror held up to history's darkest hour. It represented greed, power, and the lingering ghosts of a regime that tried to erase its sins by burying them under stone and soil. And as the modern search began, the world was about to learn that sometimes the most fascinating mysteries are not about what we find, but what we want to find. When the 2015 discovery was announced, the world's press descended on the quiet Polish city of Wałbrzych. News crews filled hotel lobbies, treasure hunters flooded the forests. And for the first time in decades, the old Nazi tunnels beneath the Al Mountains became a global obsession. For locals, it was surreal. The hills that had lain silent since The war haunted by rumors and forgotten by history were suddenly alive again with the sound of drilling, cameras, and speculation. Some came seeking truth. Others came seeking gold. At the heart of it all were two men, Piotr Koper, a Polish construction engineer, and Andreas Richter, a German treasure hunter. They claimed that radar scans taken near the 65th kilometer of a railway line between Walbersett and Wroclaw revealed a 100-meter-long anomaly shaped, they said, unmistakably, like a train. Their announcement hit the headlines like a bombshell. Nazi gold train found in Poland, read newspapers from London to New York. The myth that had survived 70 years suddenly seemed real. Poland's government took the claims seriously, enough to deploy the army, fire brigades, and geological experts to assess the site. Rumors spread that the train contained 300 tons of gold, the amber room panels, or even classified Nazi archives. The Polish Minister of Culture at the time remarked that he was 99% certain the train existed. Excitement turned into frenzy. Merchants began selling gold train souvenirs. Local hotels filled overnight, treasure hunting expeditions multiplied, and international investors offered funding for excavation. It was as if the legend had broken through the soil of time, breathing again, defying doubt. But as engineers began scanning the site with advanced equipment, a familiar pattern emerged. Hope, followed by uncertainty. The ground-penetrating radar showed anomalies, but they could also be natural geological formations. Some scientists warned that the area's complex geology produced false echoes that mimicked tunnels or metal objects. Others argued that deeper scanning would be needed to confirm anything at all. Still, the image of a hidden Nazi train buried in the Polish hills was too powerful to fade. Weeks turned into months. Excavations began, carefully, under strict supervision. Cameras documented every moment. Locals gathered along the forest paths to watch history being unearthed or disproved. Then, the truth came quietly. There was no train. The site revealed nothing. No steel, no tracks, no evidence of a buried convoy. The radar shapes had been illusions, natural shifts in soil and rock. The Polish Geological Institute confirmed it publicly. There is no indication of a train or tunnel at the examined location. The legend had survived another war, this time with reality itself. Yet, the failure to find the gold train did not end the story. If anything, it deepened it. Historians reminded the public that numerous Nazi transports had indeed vanished in 1945. Documents existed showing gold and art being moved out of Breslau and other cities with no record of where they ended up. The fact that no train was found in Walbersett did not mean one never existed. It simply meant that its grave, if real, remained elsewhere. And so, the mystery endures, not because of greed, but because it touches something primal in the human spirit, the desire to uncover what was hidden, to give shape to the ghosts of history. The Nazi gold train represents more than treasure. It's a story about memory, denial, and the long shadow of war. For Poland, it symbolizes unfinished history, the wounds of occupation, the lingering secrets beneath its soil. For the world, it's a metaphor for the countless truths buried by totalitarianism, truths we still dig for decades later. Every few years, the legend stirs again. A new radar scan, a new witness, a new promise that this time we found it. And each time, the same quiet truth returns. The most valuable things buried by the Nazis were not gold or jewels, but the stories of the millions who vanished under their regime. The gold train, whether real or myth, carries the weight of those silenced lives. Every rumor of discovery forces us to remember not just what might lie underground, but what lies in history's conscience. Because in the end, the question that haunts this story isn't where the gold went. It's why it was stolen in the first place. Spring 1945. As the Red Army closed in on Lower Silesia, Nazi Germany's final hours were collapsing into madness. But amid the chaos, one train was said to have slipped quietly out of Breslau. Now Wrocław, under the cover of night. It was heavily guarded by the SS, sealed and shrouded in secrecy. Locals who worked near the tracks whispered about wagons loaded with crates, gold, artwork, statues, and other valuables confiscated from Jewish families and museums across occupied Europe. The last of Hitler's plunder, vanishing into the twilight of defeat. According to wartime testimonies, the train headed southwest toward Walbers. Deep within the Owl Mountains, where Hitler's regime had spent years carving an underground fortress known as Project Reis, the Giant. Reis was one of the Third Reich's most secretive engineering projects, a labyrinth of tunnels, bunkers, and reinforced caverns blasted into the rock under Glitz and the Saui Mountains. Built by slave labor from concentration camps, its purpose was never fully revealed. Some claimed it was meant as a new Führer headquarters. Others as a last redoubt for the Nazi elite. By 1945, it was incomplete but vast enough to hide a train, a treasure. Or both. The rumors began with the soldiers who survived the war. Polish railway workers reported that an armored train vanished between the towns of Wiebodzice and Walberzus just before the Soviet advance. One engineer claimed he saw tracks leading into a newly built tunnel, then watched it being blown up. Others remembered columns of trucks offloading crates near the Owl Mountains, guarded by men in black SS uniforms. For decades, these accounts sat in archives, dismissed as hearsay. But when Koper and Richter revived the story in 2015, those forgotten testimonies gained new weight. The radar scans seemed to confirm what the survivors had long insisted. The Nazis had hidden something monumental underground. Excavations near the supposed site began under police and military protection. Cameras captured every motion as excavators tore through layers of earth that hadn't seen daylight since the war. The air was heavy with tension and fear, because beneath the excitement, there was a darker question few wanted to ask aloud. What if the train was buried with the people who built it? Historical records showed that thousands of forced laborers from the Gross-Rosen concentration camp system worked and died, constructing the tunnels. The mountains were littered with unmarked graves. Survivors later recalled that workers who saw too much were executed and sealed inside. So when metal detectors began to click, when fragments of rail and twisted steel were pulled from the soil, the crew grew silent. Each object was a whisper from the grave, a reminder that the treasure they sought had been built on human suffering. Polish authorities halted the dig, temporarily to conduct safety checks and to ensure no wartime ordnance or remains would be disturbed. Some locals quietly prayed that the train, if it existed, would never be found. Let it rest, one elderly resident told reporters. It's cursed. Yet, the pressure mounted. International networks demanded updates. Private investors offered millions to continue the dig. Walbers's mayor promised transparency, but rumors of government secrecy spread rapidly. Some believed the Polish state was deliberately hiding findings to avoid political embarrassment or to claim the gold privately. Then came the whispers of sabotage that the SS had booby-trapped the site in 1945. Old Nazi plans showed mention of self-destruct mechanisms, mines, and flood chambers designed to destroy evidence in case of capture. The terrain around the excavation site was unstable, riddled with sinkholes and remnants of wartime tunnels. When the drilling machinery struck a hollow section, the team froze. Seismic readings suggested a void, a large underground cavity. For a moment, excitement soared again. Had they found the entrance? But days later, the cavity collapsed, a natural cavern, not a tunnel. The void filled with water. Whatever clues lay beneath were swallowed again by the earth. The discovery was inconclusive, yet symbolic. Every attempt to unearth the gold train seemed to end the same way, the ground closing up, as if refusing to give up its secret. Still, one fragment changed everything. While reviewing declassified Soviet reports, historians uncovered a 1946 document describing large-scale confiscations of Nazi transports found in Lower Silesia. Soviet forces had allegedly seized multiple wagons of gold and valuables near the same railway corridor. If true, the gold train may indeed have existed, but been taken by the Red Army long before anyone else arrived. The Soviets never reported such treasures publicly, and many of their wartime records remain sealed to this day. It was a stunning revelation. Perhaps the treasure had been found, just not by the people, who had spent decades looking for it. And so, what began as a legend buried beneath Poland was now turning into a geopolitical puzzle, one entangled in secrecy, denial, and the buried guilt of nations that never fully told their wartime truths. As the evidence unfolded, the gold train story shifted from myth to a mirror, reflecting the secrets every nation carried from the war. The legend of a lost Nazi treasure was no longer just about gold. It was about what remained buried politically, morally, and historically in Moscow's archives. Fragments of wartime communications hinted at a disturbing possibility. Soviet field commanders stationed in Silesia reported intercepting enemy transport containing industrial valuables. Other reports mentioned confiscations of crates, precious metals, and documentation of German origin. None of these records referred to a train directly, but their descriptions fit too closely to ignore. If the Soviets had indeed discovered the train, they never acknowledged it. The Red Army's plundering during its march across Germany was notorious. Museums, factories, and banks were stripped bare. For the Kremlin, such spoils were seen as compensation for suffering, not theft. And so, the gold train might have vanished not into the Polish earth, but into the Soviet Union's vaults, reappearing only as melted bullion and reclaimed art. Decades later, but the absence of proof only deepened the myth. Because myths, when denied oxygen, do not die, they grow stronger underground by the 21st century. The Nazi gold train had become more than a historical rumor. It was a story Poland carried in its soil, an unresolved memory. Each generation rediscovered it. Like a wound that refused to heal, local historians revisited wartime maps, cross-referencing them with German and Soviet transport logs. A few found strange gaps, convoys listed as departed but never marked as arrived. Others unearthed eyewitness sketches of railway tunnels that no longer existed on modern maps. The landscape itself seemed complicit, its forests swallowing history whole. Meanwhile, forensic teams studying the Riis complex uncovered more than just concrete and rusted machinery. They found human remains, hundreds of them believed to be forced laborers from Gross Rosen. Many were buried without names, their deaths unrecorded. Each skull, each broken bone, was a silent testimony. The true treasure buried here was the truth of their suffering. Even so, the dig continued. Because human nature cannot resist mystery. We are drawn to the forbidden, the thought that a century-old fortune might still lie hidden, waiting for discovery. In 2018. A new private expedition returned to the 65th kilometer site with improved scanning technology. The readings again showed irregularities, metallic signatures, long shadows resembling rail lines. The story reignited, headlines flared, and the Polish authorities allowed another survey. But this time, the tone was different. The scientists approached with caution, not as treasure hunters, but as archaeologists of memory. The ground was carefully mapped, scanned, and analyzed. The result? Once again, no train, in yet. The legend persisted, because every piece of evidence, every false alarm seemed to confirm something larger. That the gold train wasn't just about Nazi treasure. It was about how the human mind processes loss. For Germans, it symbolized the collapse of a dream built on evil, the empire that turned on itself in flames. For Poles, it symbolized occupation, plunder, and the unending scars left by war. For the world, it was a haunting reminder that even in the ashes of defeat, greed and secrecy endure. The WWII region, once a battleground, became a metaphor for Europe's buried conscience. Beneath its hills lay not gold, but the weight of millions of stolen lives and stolen futures. One historian put it simply: the gold train is not under Poland. It's under our history, under what we refuse to confront. That statement struck deeper than any radar scan, because in the end, whether or not the train ever existed, its story forces us to look at the real treasures of war. The art, culture, and humanity erased by ideology. It compels us to ask what we choose to remember, and what we prefer to bury. As the excavations ceased and the cameras moved on, the forests reclaimed their silence. Moss grew over the disturbed soil. The rails rusted back into obscurity, but the whispers never stopped. At night, in the quiet towns of Lower Silesia, people still tell stories of the train that vanished into the mountain, of soldiers who swore they saw its headlights flicker and fade, of tunnels that breathe when the wind passes through. And maybe that's how history survives, not in gold, but in echoes. In the stories we keep digging for, even when the ground gives us nothing. When the dust settled over WWII, the truth was simpler and heavier than anyone expected. There was no gold, no train, no triumphant unearthing of Nazi treasure. But what remained was far more revealing: a nation's confrontation with its own history, and the way myth had become a coping mechanism for unresolved trauma. For Poland, the search for the Nazi gold train was never just about treasure. It was about control over memory, over the narrative of a country that had been pillaged, occupied, and scarred by two totalitarian regimes. The 2015 frenzy left behind more than excavated soil. It left scars of its own between locals who wanted the legend to rest and those who demanded that it be proven once and for all. Some accused the government of suppressing evidence to claim the gold quietly. Others blamed opportunists for exploiting grief and history for fame. But beneath the noise, there was something deeply human in the chaos, a yearning to reclaim justice, even symbolically, for what was stolen long ago. Because the gold train wasn't just a story about Nazi greed. It was about loss. The loss of nations, art, identity, and lives that vanished in the smoke of war. In 2016, when Poland's Geological Institute officially declared that no train existed at the excavation site, it didn't kill the legend. It immortalized it. WWII, once a forgotten industrial city, suddenly had an identity again, a place where the ghosts of history still whispered through the pines. The area became a symbol of both skepticism and belief, a battleground between the rational and the mythical. Tourism surged. Guided gold train tours began, leading visitors through the forests and abandoned tunnels of the Owl Mountains. Museums opened exhibits displaying wartime artifacts, radar scans, and personal accounts. And quietly, researchers began to ask a deeper question. If the gold train wasn't there, what else was buried beneath Rees? Project Rees itself remained largely unexplored, miles of sealed tunnels. Some still filled with wartime debris, others flooded or collapsed. The full extent of the network has never been mapped. Historians estimate that only a fraction of the underground system has been accessed. The rest remains sealed either by time or by design. For those who lived through the war, that secrecy felt familiar. Survivors of Gross-Rosen remembered how the Nazis destroyed records and burned evidence as the Allies advanced. Trains were loaded with stolen goods, then redirected or detonated to hide their contents. Entire archives disappeared, so when skeptics dismissed the gold train legend as fantasy, Many locals shook their heads. "We saw things," said one elderly miner. "We know something was hidden." The mountain remembers. And maybe that's why the legend endures, because it gives shape to what history cannot. Explain. The Nazi gold train became a parable, a reflection of Europe's tangled post-war guilt and memory. For Germans, it symbolized the unimaginable wealth stolen during the Holocaust and the empire's moral collapse. For Poles, it symbolized loss and survival. For the Soviets, now the Russians, it symbolized secrets still locked behind. Cold War walls. In the decades after the 2015 excavation, the story's meaning evolved. Documentaries, novels, and investigations continued to revisit it, not to find treasure, but to understand why the myth mattered, because the gold train isn't just a legend about something hidden underground. It's about the weight of a century trying to unearth itself, and the silence that always follows when the digging stops. Even as excavations ended and the media attention faded, the legend of the Nazi gold train refused to die. It had transcended its original form as a story of treasure and greed. Becoming a symbol of history's unfinished business, researchers and historians continued to sift through wartime archives. Old railway logs, SS transport reports, and declassified Soviet documents revealed glimpses of movements that had never been fully accounted for. Some trains, carrying valuables and prisoners alike, simply disappeared from the record. The possibility remained that the gold train had existed, and that, if so, it had been seized by Soviet forces or hidden in a part of the Reis network still inaccessible today. For locals in Walbrzes, the mountain forests became a place of memory rather than speculation. Guided tours of the old tunnels and abandoned mines began emphasizing history over legend, the lives lost in forced labor, the suffering endured, and the human cost of Nazi ambition. Schools incorporated the story as a lesson in ethics, war crimes, and the consequences of greed. Internationally, the tale captured imagination. Documentaries, novels, and investigative reports approached it from different angles: adventure, historical mystery, or cautionary tale. Even the failed excavations reinforced a broader truth. The gold train was more than a physical object. It was a lens through which to examine human curiosity, obsession, and the lingering scars of war. The story also prompted reflection on the ethics of treasure hunting in historical sites. Explorers had to balance the lure of wealth against respect for mass graves, wartime remnants, and the cultural heritage of Poland. In that sense, the gold train became a teaching story, a reminder that history carries responsibilities as well as mysteries. By the late 2010s, the gold train had become a legend fully integrated into Polish culture. Exhibits at the Walbrzes Museum displayed archival photographs, wartime maps, and equipment used in the 2015 survey. Oral histories preserved eyewitness testimonies. And though the treasure itself had never been found, the story had ensured that history was not forgotten in the end. The aftermath of the Nazi gold train is not measured in gold or stolen art. It is measured in memory, the collective consciousness of a community and a world wrestling with the consequences of greed, war, and secrecy. The train, whether real or imagined, remains buried in history, its story alive in the minds of those who seek truth, justice, and understanding. Even now, as the forests of Lower Silesia grow quiet and the mountains stand unmoving, the legend persists, whispering to anyone willing to listen, challenging future generations to uncover not just treasures, but the truths that lie beneath the surface of history. The story of the Nazi gold train is a tale of obsession, loss, and the shadows of history. It reminds us that not all treasures are gold, and not all legacies are measured in material wealth. For decades, the train existed in whispers, a phantom of greed and ambition, haunting forests, tunnels, and maps long forgotten. It captivated historians, treasure hunters, and entire communities, driving them to search for a fortune that may never have existed. Yet the legend endures, not because of what it contained, but because of what it represents: the human desire to uncover secrets, to confront the past, and to give shape to the unseen. Beneath the Owl Mountains, countless laborers died constructing tunnels that might have hidden the train. Across Europe, treasures stolen from innocent victims vanished, their fate unknown. The gold train, whether real or imagined, is a testament to the crimes and chaos of the Third Reich, and to the resilience of memory. History often focuses on battles, leaders, and victories. But sometimes, the quiet stories, the missing trains, the sealed tunnels, the whispers of local witnesses reveal far more about our humanity. They remind us that greed, secrecy, and ambition can leave wounds that last generations, and that the pursuit of truth requires patience, courage, and humility. Today, the legend continues to inspire. It teaches historians, storytellers, and ordinary people alike that the greatest treasures of history are often the stories themselves, the lessons they carry, and the truths they force us to confront. The gold train may never be found, but its shadow lingers, a symbol of what was lost, what was stolen, and what must never be forgotten. In the end, the Nazi gold train is more than a legend. It is a mirror reflecting our fascination with mystery, the consequences of human ambition, and the enduring power of history to challenge us, haunt us, and ultimately teach us.